My dear friends, if you're standing still, holding a single penny between your fingers. It's small, light, and almost feels insignificant. You've seen thousands just like it, maybe even ignored most of them. But then your eyes lock onto the date. 1972, and just beneath it, a tiny letter D. In that instant, the ordinary disappears. Because what you're holding might not be just 1 cent. It might be one of the most fascinating, emotionally charged, and surprisingly valuable Lincoln pennies ever struck in the United States. The 1972 D Lincoln 1 cent is not just a coin. It is a legend in copper, a symbol of liberty, a product of human error and mechanical imperfection, and a reminder that hidden value often lives inside the most overlooked objects in our lives. This is the coin that has shocked collectors, changed lives, and turned pocket change into serious money. This is the penny that proves a single mistake can create history. At first glance, the 1972 D Lincoln penny looks familiar, almost comforting. Abraham Lincoln's profile faces right, calm and resolute, a face that has stared back at Americans for generations. The word liberty rests behind him, steady and unchanging. The date 1972 anchors the coin in a specific moment in time, and the small D mint mark beneath the date quietly tells you it was struck in Denver. On the reverse, the Lincoln Memorial stands tall, with the seated statue of Lincoln visible inside, a powerful symbol of reflection and remembrance. Millions of these coins were struck, and millions passed through everyday life unnoticed. But within this sea of copper sameness exists something extraordinary. The Lincoln cent itself carries immense emotional weight. Introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, it forever changed American coinage by placing a real person on a circulating coin. Lincoln was chosen not just because he was a president, but because he represented unity, freedom, sacrifice, and the enduring idea of liberty. His image became part of everyday life. By 1972, the Lincoln penny had already lived through wars, economic crises, cultural revolutions, and social change. It had passed through the hands of farmers, factory workers, soldiers, students, and families. It was part of America's heartbeat. The year 1972 was a time of tension and transformation. The Vietnam War was still ongoing. The Cold War shaped global politics. The Watergate scandal was beginning to unfold, though few yet realized how deeply it would impact the nation. America was questioning itself, its leadership, and its future. And quietly, steadily, the U.S. Mint continued producing pennies, each one identical in design, yet each with the potential to become something far more than it was meant to be. The 1972 D Lincoln penny was struck in a copper alloy of 95% copper and 5% zinc and tin. This composition gave the coin a rich, warm color and a solid weight that modern pennies lack. These coins feel different in the hand. They feel real. They feel permanent. Even today, their copper content alone gives them a small intrinsic value above face value when copper prices rise. But metal content is not what made the 1972 D penny famous. What made it legendary was a mistake. In 1972, the Denver Mint produced hundreds of millions of pennies. With such massive production, quality control faced enormous pressure. Dies wore down. Machines ran at high speed. Human oversight was stretched thin. And somewhere in that process, something went wrong in a way that would create one of the most famous and valuable Lincoln cent errors of all time. The 1972 double die obverse is one of the most dramatic and widely recognized error coins in U.S. numismatic history. This was not a minor flaw. This was not subtle. This was bold, unmistakable, and breathtaking. A double die occurs when the die that strikes the coin receives more than one impression from the hub in slightly different positions. When this happens, every coin struck by that die carries the doubling. On the 1972 double die obverse, the doubling is so strong that it can be seen with the naked eye. The date appears doubled. The word liberty appears doubled. The phrase "In God we trust" shows dramatic separation and thickness. This is not wear. This is not damage. This is a minting mistake frozen forever in copper. The emotional impact of seeing a genuine 1972 D double die penny for the first time is unforgettable. The letters seem to vibrate. The date looks alive. It feels like the coin is trying to speak, trying to tell you that it is different, that it matters. And collectors listened. When this error was discovered, it sent shockwaves through the numismatic community. People began checking their change. Rolls of pennies were searched obsessively. The idea that a penny worth 1 cent could be worth hundreds or thousands was electrifying. And it was real. A genuine 1972 double-die penny in circulated condition ca. Great viewers, if you are holding a single penny. It feels light, almost weightless, the kind of coin people drop without caring, the kind of coin children leave behind because it seems too small to matter. You turn it over, barely paying attention, and then you notice the date. 1976, suddenly, something shifts. Because that date is not just a number. It represents a year that shook the heart of a nation, a year filled with pride, reflection, celebration, and memory. And that tiny copper coin in your hand, the 1976 Lincoln 1 cent, might not be worth just 1 cent at all. It might carry hidden value born from mistakes, errors, mint mark anomalies, and rare circumstances that have turned ordinary pennies into astonishing treasures. This is the story of how liberty, history, human imperfection, and emotion collide inside one of the most overlooked coins in America. At first glance, the 1976 Lincoln penny looks exactly like countless others. Abraham Lincoln's profile faces right, calm, thoughtful, and steady, a face Americans had trusted for generations. The word liberty sits behind him, simple yet powerful. The date 1976 rests below, unassuming, easy to ignore. On the reverse, the Lincoln Memorial stands tall, with Lincoln seated inside, a quiet detail many never notice. There is nothing flashy here. No special bicentennial design like the quarter or half-dollar. And yet, that simplicity is part of what makes this coin so fascinating. Because while everyone was focused on fireworks, parades, and red, white, and blue celebrations, billions of pennies were being struck, each one quietly entering circulation, each one carrying the weight of a historic year. The Lincoln penny itself is deeply emotional in American history. First issued in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, it was the first U.S. circulating coin to feature a real person. That decision was not taken lightly. Lincoln represented unity after division, hope after suffering, and liberty above all else. His image became a symbol Americans saw every day, a reminder of shared values passed from hand to hand. By 1976, the Lincoln penny had already been part of American life for nearly 70 years. It had seen world wars, economic collapse, recovery, cultural revolutions, and social change. It had been carried by soldiers, factory workers, students, parents, and children. It had lived in pockets, jars, purses, and drawers. It was ordinary, and that is exactly why it matters. The year 1976 was extraordinary. It marked the 200th anniversary of American independence. The nation paused to look back at its origins, its struggles, and its triumphs. There was pride, nostalgia, and reflection everywhere. America was also healing from deep wounds. The Vietnam War had ended just a year earlier. Trust in government had been shaken. Inflation and economic uncertainty weighed heavily on daily life. People were searching for meaning, for stability, for something to believe in. And through all of this, the penny continued its quiet work, facilitating everyday life, unnoticed yet essential. The 1976 Lincoln penny was struck in a copper alloy of 95% copper and 5% zinc and tin. These were real copper coins, heavier and richer in color than modern pennies. They feel solid in the hand, warmer, more substantial. Even today, their copper content gives them a small intrinsic value above face value when copper prices rise. But the true value of a 1976 penny has very little to do with metal content. It has everything to do with rarity, condition, and the fascinating mistakes that slipped through the system. In 1976, pennies were minted at 3 locations. Philadelphia produced coins with no mint mark. Denver produced coins with a D mint mark. San Francisco produced coins with an S mint mark, including both business strikes and proof coins for collectors. The total number of pennies minted that year reached into the billions. Because of this, most 1976 pennies found today are heavily circulated and worth only 1 cent. They are scratched, worn, darkened, and dull from decades of use. To most people, they are meaningless. But collectors know a secret. Value does not live in the average. It lives in the exception. Condition is one of the most powerful forces in determining the value of a 1976 Lincoln penny. A coin that never circulated, that still holds its original mint luster and bright red copper color, exists in a completely different universe of value. These coins are graded on a scale, and as the grade increases, the population drops sharply. While many uncirculated 1976 pennies exist, very few survive in near-perfect condition. A 1976 penny in lower uncirculated grades might be worth a few dollars. But as the grade climbs to MS66 red or MS67 red, the value can explode. These coins are breathtaking. The surfaces glow. The details are razor sharp. There are no distractions, no marks, no signs of age. Some of the finest known one. If you're cleaning out an old drawer, a jar of loose change, or maybe counting coins at the end of a long day, your fingers brush against a penny. You barely notice it at first. It's small, light, almost invisible in a world obsessed with bigger numbers and faster money. But then you look down and see the date. 1981, something about it pauses you for just a second. Because what if that penny isn't just 1 cent? What if that 1981 Lincoln 1 cent, a coin most people overlook without a thought, carries hidden value, emotional weight, and rare possibilities that could make it worth far more than its face value? What if inside that tiny coin lives a story of liberty, human error, mechanical imperfection, and history quietly waiting to be discovered? This is not imagination. This is the real story of the 1981 Lincoln penny. A coin born during a time of transition, struck in massive numbers, yet capable of becoming extraordinary because of condition, mistakes, mint mark errors, and rare circumstances that collectors search for with passion and hope. This is the story of how even in the modern era, when coins feel common and disposable, a single penny can still surprise, inspire, and sometimes change lives. At first glance, the 1981 Lincoln penny looks completely ordinary. Abraham Lincoln's familiar profile faces right, calm and dignified, a face Americans had trusted for generations. The word liberty rests quietly behind him. The date 1981 anchors the coin in time. On the reverse, the Lincoln Memorial stands tall, with Lincoln seated inside, a small detail many never notice. There is nothing flashy. No special commemorative design. No bold announcement of importance. And that is exactly why this coin is so fascinating. Because when something looks ordinary, most people stop looking. And when people stop looking, extraordinary things remain hidden. The Lincoln cent is one of the most emotionally powerful coins in American history. Introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, it marked the first time a real person appeared on a circulating U.S. coin. That decision was revolutionary. Lincoln was chosen not just because he was a president, but because he symbolized unity, perseverance, sacrifice, and liberty. His image became part of everyday life, passing through hands at moments both mundane and historic. By 1981, the Lincoln penny had already been part of American culture for more than 70 years. It had witnessed world wars, economic collapse and recovery, civil rights movements, the moon landing, and the Cold War. It had been there through triumph and uncertainty alike. The year 1981 itself was a turning point. America was stepping into a new decade. Inflation and economic uncertainty weighed heavily on families. Interest rates were high. Jobs were changing. Technology was beginning to reshape daily life. Ronald Reagan had just taken office, signaling a shift in political and economic philosophy. The world felt tense but hopeful, cautious yet ambitious. And through all of this, pennies continued to flow endlessly through the economy, unnoticed yet essential, facilitating everyday life in a rapidly changing world. The 1981 Lincoln penny is especially interesting because it sits right on the edge of a major transition in U.S. coinage. In 1982, the United States Mint changed the composition of the penny from primarily copper to primarily zinc with a thin copper coating, due to rising metal costs. That means 1981 pennies are among the last full-year issues made almost entirely of copper. They feel heavier. They sound different when dropped. They carry a warmth modern pennies lack. This alone gives them a subtle emotional weight, a sense of being the end of an era. In 1981, pennies were minted at 3 locations. Philadelphia produced coins with no mint mark. Denver produced coins with a D mint mark. San Francisco produced coins with an S mint mark, primarily proof coins intended for collectors. The total number of pennies minted that year reached into the billions. Because of this massive production, most 1981 pennies you encounter today are worth only face value if they have been heavily circulated. They are worn, scratched, darkened, and dull from decades of use. To the average person, they are insignificant. But value does not live in the average. It lives in the exceptions. Condition is one of the most powerful factors that can transform a 1981 penny from ordinary to extraordinary. A coin that never circulated, that still retains its original mint luster and bright red copper color, exists in a completely different category of value. These coins are graded on a scale, and as the grade increases, the number of surviving examples drops sharply. While many uncirculated 1981 pennies exist, very few survive in near-perfect condition. A 1981 penny in lower uncirculated grades might be worth a few dollars. But as the grade climbs to MS66 red or MS67 red, the value can rise. Picture this moment slowly, vividly, and let it breathe. You reach into your pocket, a jar, a drawer, or maybe the bottom of an old box you haven't touched in years. Your fingers close around a penny. It feels ordinary, almost forgettable. You've seen thousands like it. You've spent them without thought. But this time, something makes you pause. You turn it over. The date reads 1984. Beneath it, a tiny letter D quietly marks its origin. In that instant, the ordinary cracks open. Because that small copper-colored coin in your hand, the 1984 D Lincoln 1 cent, might not be worth just 1 cent at all. It might be worth hundreds. It might be worth thousands. It might carry one of the most famous and emotionally powerful errors in modern U.S. coin history. This is not just a penny. This is a story of liberty, chance, imperfection, and hidden value waiting to be discovered by those willing to look closer. This coin has fooled millions of people. It has passed through countless hands unnoticed. It has lived in pockets, cash registers, vending machines, and couch cushions. And yet, within this sea of sameness exists a legendary mistake that transformed an everyday penny into one of the most sought-after Lincoln cents of the modern era. The 1984 D Lincoln penny is proof that value does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides. And sometimes it lives inside the smallest object you own. At first glance, the 1984 D Lincoln penny looks completely familiar. Abraham Lincoln's profile faces right, calm and resolute, a face Americans have trusted for generations. The word liberty sits behind him, steady and quiet. The date 1984 rests below, anchoring the coin to a specific moment in time. Beneath the date, the D Mint mark reveals it was struck at the Denver Mint. On the reverse, the Lincoln Memorial stands tall, with Lincoln seated inside, a detail so small many people never even realize it's there. The design feels timeless, almost invisible because of how common it is. And that familiarity is exactly why so many extraordinary 1984 D pennies slipped through unnoticed. The Lincoln cent itself carries immense emotional weight in American history. First introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, it marked the first time a real person appeared on a circulating U.S. coin. This was not a small decision. Lincoln represented unity after division, freedom after suffering, and the enduring promise of liberty. His image became part of daily life, passed from hand to hand across generations. By 1984, the Lincoln penny had already lived through wars, economic collapse, recovery, civil rights movements, cultural revolutions, and technological change. It had been there during moments of fear and moments of hope. It was more than currency. It was a constant. The year 1984 itself carries emotional weight. America was deep into the Cold War. Tensions with the Soviet Union shaped global politics. Nuclear fear lingered in the background of everyday life. At the same time, the country was experiencing rapid technological growth, cultural shifts, and economic change. Ronald Reagan was president. Optimism and anxiety existed side by side. Personal computers were entering homes. Music, movies, and media were evolving fast. And through all of this, pennies continued to circulate quietly, facilitating daily life without fanfare. By 1984, the penny had already undergone a major transformation. In 1982, the United States Mint changed the composition of the penny from mostly copper to mostly zinc with a thin copper coating. The 1984 D. Lincoln penny is part of this newer generation. It looks similar to older pennies, but it feels lighter. It sounds different when dropped. It represents a shift driven by economics, a reminder that even something as small as a penny is shaped by the pressures of its time. In 1984, pennies were minted at 3 locations. Philadelphia struck coins with no mint mark. Denver struck coins with a D mint mark. San Francisco struck proof coins with an S mint mark for collectors. The Denver Mint produced an enormous number of pennies that year. Because of this massive production, most 1984 D pennies you encounter today are worth exactly 1 cent if they are worn and circulated. They are scratched, dull, and unremarkable to the untrained eye. But within that massive production run lies one of the most famous and dramatic error varieties in modern U.S. coinage. An error so well known, so heavily searched for, and so emotionally charged that it has become legendary among collectors. The 1984 double-ear Lincoln penny. This is the error that changed everything. A double die error occurs when the die used to strike coins receives more than one impression from the hub in slightly different positions. When this happens, every coin struck by that die carries the doubling. On the 1984 D. Lincoln penny, this doubling appears most clearly on Lincoln's ear. Inst. The kind most people leave behind on sidewalks or toss into jars without a second thought. It feels light. Almost meaningless. You turn it over out of habit, and the date catches your eye. 1991, beneath it, a small D mint mark. You hesitate, just for a second. Because what if this coin isn't just 1 cent? What if this 1991 D. Lincoln 1 cent, born in a time of massive change, quiet tension, and hidden transitions, carries a value far beyond its face value because of mistakes, errors, mint mark anomalies, and rare circumstances that most people never notice? What if this tiny piece of copper-plated zinc carries liberty, history, and hidden treasure all at once? This is not fantasy. This is the real story of the 1991 D. Lincoln penny. A coin struck in staggering numbers, dismissed by millions, yet capable of becoming something extraordinary when imperfection steps in. This is a story about how value hides inside the ordinary, how mistakes can become priceless, and how liberty itself sometimes whispers instead of shouting. The 1991 D. Lincoln penny looks familiar because it was designed to blend into everyday life. Abraham Lincoln's profile faces right, calm, thoughtful, and steady. The word liberty sits behind him, simple but powerful. The date 1991 anchors the coin in a specific moment in American history. Below the date, the D mint mark tells us this coin was struck at the Denver Mint. On the reverse, the Lincoln Memorial stands tall, with the seated figure of Lincoln visible inside, a detail so small most people never notice it at all. This design had already been in use for decades by 1991, and that familiarity is exactly why so many people stopped looking closely. But familiarity is dangerous when it comes to value. Because when people stop looking, rare things slip through unnoticed. The Lincoln cent is not just a coin. It is a symbol woven into American life. Introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, it was the first U.S. coin to feature a real person. That choice was deeply emotional and deeply intentional. Lincoln represented unity after division, hope after despair, and liberty above all else. His image became part of everyday transactions, passing through hands in moments both ordinary and historic. By 1991, the Lincoln penny had already lived through world wars, the Great Depression, the Civil Rights Movement, the Cold War, and the Space Age. It had been there for triumph and tragedy alike. The year 1991 itself was charged with emotion and transformation. The Cold War was ending. The Soviet Union was on the brink of collapse. The Gulf War had just taken place, bringing images of modern warfare into living rooms around the world. Technology was accelerating rapidly. Personal computers were becoming more common. The internet was quietly taking its first steps. America stood at the edge of a new era, uncertain but hopeful. And through all of this, pennies continued to circulate quietly, unnoticed, carrying the weight of daily life. By 1991, the penny had already changed composition. Since 1982, Lincoln cents were made primarily of zinc with a thin copper coating. This made them lighter, cheaper to produce, and more vulnerable to damage. The 1991 D penny is part of this modern generation. It looks similar to older pennies, but it feels different. It lacks the warmth and weight of earlier copper coins. And yet, despite this modern composition, it still holds the potential for extraordinary value. In 1991, pennies were minted at 3 locations. Philadelphia struck coins with no mint mark. Denver struck coins with a D mint mark. San Francisco struck proof coins with an S mint mark, primarily for collectors. The Denver Mint produced hundreds of millions of pennies that year. Because of this massive production, the vast majority of 1991 D pennies are worth exactly 1 cent if they show wear. They are scratched, dull, and common. To most people, they are invisible. But collectors know something most people do not. Value is not about how many were made. It is about how many survived in special condition or with special characteristics. Condition plays a powerful role in determining the value of a 1991 D Lincoln penny. Most of these coins entered circulation immediately and picked up marks, wear, and damage. Truly pristine examples are far scarcer than people realize. A 1991 D penny that still has full original mint luster, bright red color, and clean surfaces belongs to a completely different category. Coins are graded on a scale, and as the grade increases, the number of surviving examples drops sharply. A 1991 D penny in lower uncirculated grades might be worth a few dollars. But as the grade climbs into MS66 red and MS67 red territory, values can rise dramatically. These coins are visually stunning. Lincoln's hair shows crisp detail. The fields glow with original luster. There are no distracting marks. Some of the finest known examples have sold for hundreds. You reach into your pocket, your wallet, a jar of spare change, or the dusty corner of a drawer you haven't opened in years. Your fingers close around a penny. It feels light, almost insignificant, the kind of coin people leave behind on sidewalks or drop without even bothering to pick it up. You turn it over without thinking, and your eyes land on the date. 2000, beneath it, a small D mint mark. For just a second, something inside you pauses. Because that date is more than a number. It marks the beginning of a new millennium. And that tiny coin in your hand, the 2000 D Lincoln 1 cent, might not be worth just 1 cent at all. It might carry hidden value, rare possibilities, and emotional weight created by mistakes, errors, and mint mark anomalies that transformed ordinary pennies into surprising treasures. This is not exaggeration. This is the real story of the 2000 D Lincoln penny. A coin struck in massive quantities, dismissed by millions, yet capable of becoming extraordinary when imperfection enters the picture. This is a story about liberty, transition, chance, and the idea that even in the modern world, hidden value still exists in the smallest places. At first glance, the 2000 D Lincoln penny looks exactly like what you expect a penny to look like. Abraham Lincoln's profile faces right, calm, thoughtful, and steady. The word liberty rests behind him, familiar and quiet. The date 2000 sits below, simple and modern, marking a historic turning point in time. Beneath the date, the D mint mark tells us the coin was struck at the Denver Mint. On the reverse, the Lincoln Memorial stands tall, with the seated figure of Lincoln visible inside, a detail so tiny many people never notice it at all. The design is familiar to the point of invisibility. And that familiarity is exactly why so many valuable 2000 D pennies slipped through unnoticed. The Lincoln cent itself is deeply woven into the emotional fabric of American life. First introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, it was the first circulating U.S. coin to feature a real person. This was a bold and symbolic decision. Lincoln represented unity after division, freedom after suffering, and the enduring promise of liberty. His image became part of everyday transactions, passing through hands at moments both ordinary and historic. By the year 2000, the Lincoln penny had already been part of American life for more than 90 years. It had seen world wars, economic collapse, recovery, civil rights struggles, cultural revolutions, and the dawn of the digital age. It had been there for joy and hardship alike. The year 2000 carried enormous emotional weight. It marked the beginning of a new millennium, a symbolic reset that filled people with hope, anxiety, excitement, and reflection. The world had worried about Y2K, about computers failing, about systems collapsing. When nothing catastrophic happened, there was relief and celebration. Technology was accelerating rapidly. The internet was becoming part of daily life. Mobile phones were spreading. The world felt smaller, faster, and more connected than ever before. And through all of this, pennies continued to circulate quietly, unnoticed, grounding everyday life in something familiar and physical. By the year 2000, the penny had long since changed composition. Since 1982, Lincoln cents were made primarily of zinc with a thin copper coating. The 2000 penny belongs to this modern generation. It is lighter than older copper pennies. It feels different in the hand. It sounds different when dropped. It reflects economic realities, cost-saving measures, and the changing priorities of a modern world. And yet, despite this modern composition, the 2000 penny still holds the potential for extraordinary value. In 2000, pennies were minted at 3 locations. Philadelphia struck coins with no mint mark. Denver struck coins with a D mint mark. San Francisco struck proof coins with an S mint mark for collectors. The Denver Mint produced hundreds of millions of pennies that year. Because of this enormous production, the vast majority of 2000 pennies are worth exactly 1 cent if they show signs of circulation. They are scratched, dulled, discolored, and common. To most people, they are invisible. But value is not created by quantity. It is created by rarity, condition, and difference. Condition plays a powerful role in determining the value of a 2000 Lincoln penny. Most of these coins entered circulation immediately and picked up marks, nicks, and wear. Truly pristine examples are far scarcer than people realize. A 2000 penny that still has full original mint luster, bright red color, and clean surfaces belongs to a completely different category of value. Coins are graded on a scale, and as the grade rises, the population drops sharply. A 2000 penny in lower uncirculated grades might be worth a few dollars. But as the grade climbs into MS66 red, MS67 red, and beyond, v.